Alright, so if you saw that embarrassing attempt at a live stream, you'll see that my internet is apparently not prepared for that at the moment, so I have to do this impromptu video to get my thoughts out on the topic we were discussing. Which is, this is less of like, the typical movie videos that we do, and more of just a continuation of our award season videos. Because usually I'll do like the, typical reviews for the Best Picture nominees, basically as they're coming out. But there was just a lot going on this season, so I've just kind of been doing that in the midst of our live streams about award season. Where like whatever movie comes up, if it's Anatomy of Fall, American Fiction, whatever, we just talked about it then, and that was basically what the review was. But I felt the need to single out Maestro specifically as a conversation point because it's obviously been subject to quite a bit of discourse since it came out, but what's really specifically interesting about it is this movie's whole trajectory on how it was being perceived. Because before it came out, it was just kind of being seen by people in the industry. And I remember when Bradley Cooper kind of moderated this conversation with Todd Field and Kate Blanchett last year to talk about Tar. So, of course, naturally, him doing this came up. And already then, there was like a lot of build up around it, and like this was going to be a really great thing. And then industry people started to see it shortly before it came out, and it was just getting really built up as like this monument of cinema that was about to happen. Just this really grand masterpiece of sorts. It was like gonna. It's like, changing how people look at things artistically and stuff like that. Gary Oldman said that he wrote Bradley Cooper a letter after he saw it. And it was just being really built up as this sort of gigantic, seeming like game changer of sorts, which is basically a guarantee of one thing: everybody else is going to think it's overrated. You're basically setting it up to fail when you build a movie up that much, and sure enough, people will flock to it to tell you how much they think it sucks pretty much right away. So, and not to be too cynical about it, I'm sure there's plenty of people that have their legit criticisms. There's definitely things in it that you can criticize, and I'll do that too. But I also can't help but think it's, because a lot of it's just about it being awards bait and stuff like that, and Bradley Cooper trying to get an Oscar and stuff like that, and the way he talked about his passion for it during the roundtables and stuff like that, and when you hear the same points over and over again, you kind of become subject to roasts, which makes sense, and I'm guilty of doing that also. But looking at it from more of a perspective of like outside of all of this, like outside of the award season, outside of the hype, I think there's a lot of merit in this movie and a lot of things to like about it. So I kind of wanted to, I guess, defend it in a way, which is really interesting in general. That's one of the things that I was really intrigued by, was the fact that we went from, oh, there's no way this movie's not overrated, to holy shit, did this movie get underrated at some point? But it really depends on like the circles you're in, I guess. Like if you go down YouTube rabbit holes and all that bullshit, you'll see a lot of hate. A lot of that, like the YouTube essays and stuff like that, just feel like bandwagoning. Um, but like I said, there are people that just genuinely did not take to it, and I can actually see, even as somebody that likes the movie, I feel like I can pinpoint the things people probably find irritating about it. And many of those might be things I actually praise about it, but I get it. I get if it's like, oh, that's just the worst. It's like you can see, actors acting in all caps and stuff like that. There's definitely criticisms that could be warranted and aren't just, bandwagoning or wanting attention or whatever. Like I imagine some of it is, at least some of it is. So yeah, I kind of wanted to go into this middle ground territory of where I stand, where I'm not in love with the movie. It didn't even make my top 10 when we did that, but I do really like it, and I think there's a lot of things in it that kind of garner the praise it was initially getting. Maybe not to that extent. It's not, one of the greatest things that ever happened to cinema or anything like that. But it's not horrible. When people say it's like horrible and terrible and stuff like that, that just sounds like way overkill. So I kind of just want to talk about some of the points in general. And like I said, this is a very impromptu video, and I'm a little irritated, so forgive me if I'm just going to I'm basically going to read you the notes that I was going to kind of make discussion points in the live stream that did not go so well. So, but Ashley and Owen are still doing that video. They probably finished by now, so that'll be up also. But yeah, I'm just kind of doing my separate thing because the internet sucks. So, going from that, I did want to start right away with feeling kind of bad for Cooper in a sense, because like when I write stuff myself, and it can be very disheartening when you come up with something that you feel is very original to you, and it's your idea and your thing, your baby, if you will. And then something will come out like right after that that kind of is similar enough that it basically kind of destroys the originality of your idea completely unintentionally from either party. And so you look at some of the choices Cooper made here as far as what the movie looks like. So you see the aspect ratio at the start, and you think, Cooper probably went into that thinking like, oh, I've got this idea, this is going to be like this really, standout sort of storytelling device. It kind of gives it this sort of classic feel, maybe this sort of intimate feel, and then both Saltburn and Monica come out the same year, both also in that aspect ratio. So the original, it might not feel as original as far as that idea goes in regards to those other movies just happening to come out. And then there's the use of the color and the black and white, where which I actually like in the context of Maestro, because it is like the black and white kind of seems to represent like their honeymoon period and this sort of this sort of storybook era of their romance. And then when there's that abrupt cut to color, you'll notice that the very first shot that's in color, apart from the prologue, is Carey Mulligan facing away from the camera to kind of show like there's a distance here. So it's like once we go into color, you can see this is kind of like when the deterioration of their relationship and their marriage has kind of started to begin, like to really fall into place. Because obviously there's a time jump when we go from black and white to color also, and that's a really good technique. But at the same time, Poor Things just came out pretty much right alongside Maestro, and it's the exact same structure from color to black and white, where you have a prologue that's in this really great bright color, then you have about 40 minutes of black and white, and then the rest is in vibrant color. And it's like, that's the exact structure of Maestro, that's the exact structure of Poor Things. And it's like, I feel so bad for Cooper, because that must have felt like such this original artistic choice that was going to be so specific to this movie, and now it's not, solely because of coincidence. And that fucking sucks. Anybody that has any creative bone in their body knows how much that sucks. I don't care how much success and money and whatever else Bradley Cooper has. If you're looking at it from a creative standpoint, I'm very sympathetic towards that. So, but honestly, I don't think it affects my particular opinion of the movie. I still feel like it has its own artistic merits within its own story, that I can separate it from what Saltburn or what Poor Things did. So I want to put that out there, first of all. And then talking about it in general as far as what kind of movie it is, where it could come off as like a stuffy sort of biopic. And that's probably the vibe a lot of people will get from it, if they only watch like the first 10 or 15 minutes or sight unseen completely. But what surprised me about this movie is how quickly it lets you know that it's very high energy. Where we get that moment where he wakes up in bed, and then he jumps out of bed, he gets the call, and then there's the transition to the Carnegie Hall thing. And it's like, what's great about it is it feels like the movie is really high energy because he as a character is really high energy. So the movie spends its entirety basically trying to keep up with him as a character. And so I really like what it was bringing to that. And like I said, especially when this could have just been some, boring, lifeless biopic. I love the energy that's in it. You can really see, he did a whole interview with Spike Lee, and I think there were inspirations in it. You can see how Spike Lee's movies are also movies that can be accused of being, like, stuffy or whatever, when they're actually extremely energetic, and alive. And you can really kind of see that inspiration here. So I was really liking that throughout it, and that's something that when you just establish a vibe and you can keep up with it, that's gonna really help as far as like stigmatism against your subject matter. Subject matter in this instance being, the biopic, which is something that's quite played out at this point. It can be, you know, quite boring and lifeless. So when you're taking approaches like this, you can tell there's care from the person making it. It doesn't feel like, you know, Bradley Cooper just wanted an Oscar, despite that being the narrative for a lot of people. And, you know, just talking about him in general as an actor, too, in the movie, playing this character. First of all, the thing I wanted to point out was that Bradley Cooper is much more... Because, you know, he has those sort of, you know, stereotypically Hollywood handsome looks. It's easy to just kind of say, oh, Bradley Cooper is always going to be Bradley Cooper because he always looks like Bradley Cooper or whatever. But watching him play Bernstein kept making me think, and it wasn't necessarily the, oh, I'm only seeing Bradley Cooper thing. It was actually kind of the opposite, even though my mind was always acknowledging that it was Bradley Cooper, because what I was thinking about was, let's go back to, like, Wedding Crashers and The Hangover, and then let's go to that psychopath that he was playing in American Hustle. So Chris Kyle. You think about all those characters, and when I look at Bernstein in this movie, I kind of cannot believe it's the same person. It's pretty wild, and so I think Bradley Cooper may not get enough credit for how really diverse of an actor he is. Let alone the fact that he's, you know, a producer and a writer and director and all that other stuff. He's got 12 Oscar nominations to his name just because of how many fucking hats he wears. None of those are a director yet, but I imagine the time will eventually come. But going on that and talking about his performance in this, the really annoying thing about it is that I can imagine it being that thing where, especially when you look at these stupid YouTube videos, not just on Maestro, but on anything, in movie discourse in general, what a lot of these tend to do is they will take just a tiny, tiny thing, just the smallest aspect of something, and basically try to convince you that the entire performance or the entire movie is that one thing. Sean Penn was a victim of this with Mystic River, where in Mystic River he has the one scene where he screams, and so a lot of time you'll bring in that performance and everybody says, oh, he just screams in that, why do you win an Oscar for it? And it's like, no, it was one fucking scene. But for some reason, people blow up one aspect in their heads to make it seem like it's an entire movie or an entire performance. And I can see that happening to Cooper here in, like, some of these more theatrical moments. Like when he's talking to Matt Bomer and his wife and he does the I'm reining it in thing. I can imagine people taking that clip out of context and saying this is what this camp factor that lasted for a fraction of a second is what the whole performance is. I can absolutely see that happening. And so, when you look at it, he doesn't really have a lot of big moments. Ashley was talking about this in what little of the live stream I survived, where it was like, he doesn't really have, like, big, giant monologues that are, like, you know, begging for an Oscar or anything like that, or, like, you know, trying to be Shakespearean or anything. He's got long scenes of dialogue, like there's the prologue and the epilogue, or any scene where he's being interviewed. But all of these are quite downplayed. And the thing about that also is the more time you spend with the character and the way he's playing him, the more he does feel lived in and the more he feels like a real person. And I think the makeup helps a lot, because the makeup has had some criticism, I guess, but like I was saying in the awards videos, I don't really see an actor in makeup which is typically what you do see when an actor does that, like gets buried under prosthetics and stuff like that. It's like you're looking for the actor, and a lot of the times you can see the actor in there. But there's some cases like this where the performance and the makeup are working together simultaneously, and in such tandem that you just don't see an actor anymore. And I feel like this is one of those performances that actually accomplishes that. And the fact that, yeah, you can see that it's like, you know, acting in all caps, essentially. But I don't know, like I said, as it went on, and I feel less like it's Cooper giving a theatrical performance and more he's playing a theatrical person. And so whenever he has those moments, those ring true to me, and they feel off the cuff in this way that's not... Because you can feel off the cuff and you can feel improvised in a way that's a bit too obvious. And like, there's cases in this where I actually ask myself, like, was that scripted or was that not? Because if it was scripted, they did a great job of making it seem off the cuff. And sometimes it can get annoying because it's like it's a David O. Russell movie or something, which obviously he's very familiar with, where a script might as well not even exist because they go so off the cuff, and that can be really annoying and disjointed. But here I feel like there's kind of a perfect marriage of both of those things. Like there's a moment when he's at the party and he runs into somebody and he says something like, "Oh, it was like you just appeared out of my handkerchief. Are you a genie?" And it's like it's such a disjointed comment that barely makes sense. It felt like this very real moment where somebody's trying to say something clever in real life that sounds like something you'd read in a script, but it just isn't that, because that's not really, because people aren't snappy in real life, so they can't come up with snappy, clever things. That's basically what that felt like, was Bernstein just kind of going off the cuff in this very natural way. So it actually wouldn't even surprise me if that was scripted, but the fact that I can't tell for sure, I feel like makes it really work. And the way he speaks in general, this is the kind of stuff I was talking about where I was saying, I can imagine people being irritated with this, even though it's something that I actually love about it. Like some of this dialogue, where what I like about it also, where I was talking about him feeling like a lived-in character and actually like a real person, the way Cooper plays him, is these moments that are, like I said, are theatrical because he's a theatrical person, not because Cooper's playing him theatrically. Right, Cooper's the one being theatrical and not Bernstein. So, like, there's these moments throughout the movie where you can sit, it's like his choice in vocabulary is like basically him amusing himself, if that makes sense. Like, the moment when he finds Snoopy in the vestibule, and so he comes into the room and he's holding Snoopy up, and he starts to say, who left Snoopy in the vestibule is what he starts to say, and then he changes the sentence to who abandoned Snoopy in the vestibule. And it's just stuff like that where you can see him altering his vocabulary, and like I said, just in a way that seems like he's amusing himself with the way that he speaks. So it's like he's intentionally, speaking in these very theatrical ways. And like I said, when they established that as a character trait, you start to really feel this person just like oozing off the screen as this really true to life person. There's the moment when he meets the tall guy at the party, and the way he just says like, "Oh, you're a grand man, you're a huge fella." Like everything he says has to be theatrical, but you can see Bernstein making those choices and not Bradley Cooper the actor or Bradley Cooper the writer. And so they're because of that, they're very funny. Like, he's a very funny character throughout it because of these moments, where you can, like, almost see inside his head as he's, speaking to whoever it is, whether it be a family member or somebody he's just met. There's that moment where he walks into the same party, and I don't even remember if we see this interaction he's talking about, but he's very irate, and he says, like, "I just got trampled on in my own house. Like, I was nearly decapitated." And it's like just because everything is so theatrical in his delivery. That's when I really started to, like, come around on this performance, and it didn't just feel like I can imagine in the earlier scenes, it could be like, oh, Cooper's real. You can see the actor mechanics in Cooper's head turning as he makes each decision. But as the character gets older, it actually feels like Cooper himself got more relaxed in the role the older Bernstein gets. And I thought that was really coming through in this really positive way for his performance. There's whether he's holding, like, the tray of cocaine for people, and his delivery of you're just raining down from your fucking nose onto me. All of this is so funny. And then there's the another moment where I genuinely can't tell if it's choreographed or just happened. When they're fighting during Thanksgiving, the shot where the camera just sits there completely still, and the balloons are going by in the window. When Cooper first enters the room, he trips over the table really subtly and just says, like, "Jesus Christ," and then continues his dialogue. And it feels very authentic, but like I said, at the same time, would not surprise me if it was choreographed. But there's just so many of those throughout the movie. And that it's moments like that that I feel like really make everything grounded enough that you can invest in these people that are larger than life and living lives that we will certainly never live, realistically, I guess. Um, and so that's, I think, where a lot of the appeal comes in, and that's where I feel like the movie could have lost me, and where I imagine it probably could lose a lot of people, or did, in the people that didn't care for this movie, and I can get it. But now that we've talked about Cooper, I do want to talk about the fact that when you talk about what the movie is about, and there's something that Cooper has been saying in promotion for this movie, and it's one of those cases where I can imagine it being. I feel like I've seen certain scenarios where people will say their movie is about something in particular, and then you watch the movie and it's like, I feel like it's barely about that thing. I think you're talking out here. I think you're full of shit. But the thing Cooper was talking about was that basically it's a movie about Felicia. It's a movie about Felicia and about their marriage. It's not meant to be a biopic of Bernstein. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I absolutely think that's the case. Because the first thing a lot of people pointed out was the fact that Carey Mulligan's actually billed over him in the credits, which is interesting enough as it is. But when you watch the movie from the very beginning, like the opening scene is him establishing, I miss her terribly. And so we're setting up, how did he get to this point of longing for this love that's no longer here? And then we introduce him, and then we get to this moment where they meet at a party, he and Felicia. And right here, the first time we see Carey Mulligan in the movie, you already get the sense of exactly what he's talking about, of this being a movie about Felicia, and Felicia being the center of the movie. When there's the very cool aspect of only using Bernstein's music throughout it in place of a score, an original score. And so when Felicia enters the movie, she comes in on this bus and she gets off and she's going to this party. And if you just put normal music in there, or maybe no music at all or something, it's just an introduction to the character, it's quite mundane. She's getting off a bus and she's going to a party. But the music makes this such a grand entrance. Like, this bus pulling up and her getting off of it shows, like, this is the star of this story. This is what gets him to that point of being, a lonely old man at his piano longing for a lost love. And that's how we meet her. And it's like, you can look at it as a vanity project for Cooper or whatever, but vanity projects this would have been a Bernstein movie all over and pretty much nothing else. Felicia would have been a background character, essentially. She would have had like 3 scenes as a bickering wife, and that would have been it. But you can tell from right here and onward for the rest of the movie, it was always his intention to make this kind of a Felicia movie and her marriage to Bernstein. And what it was like being married to Bernstein, and what she was going through. And even when there's moments where it's just him, like the scene where he's being interviewed outside, and, they're talking about his career, and, what his legacy's going to be or whatever, and then Felicia comes up, and then the conversation becomes about Felicia, and so it's like, everything comes back to her, even when she's not in the scene. And so that, I feel like he completely lived up to what he was saying about this being her movie, essentially. Despite the fact that we may follow Bernstein throughout it, but she's always present in one way or another, and she's always the driving force of whatever he's doing, or gives whatever he's doing consequences. And so that... And the fact that Mulligan has the presence, obviously, to be able to do that, even when she's not on screen. And it's like, there's like the moment when he pulls up and it's playing the West Side Story music, and we're kind of under the impression that he's like having affairs. And when we watch him come, and keep in mind, not only is it just, the tone of the music in general, the piece from West Side Story that he chose to use here, but the fact that Bernstein was so annoyed with West Side Story after a certain point. So when he pulls up and it's playing that West Side Story music, it is basically like we're watching him through Felicia's perspective, because he's on Felicia's shit list at this point, and he's about to hear about it. Like, that's what he's coming into in this scene. And just with, like, a music cue, without Felicia even on screen, Felicia controls the scene. And so that's something that I felt like he really... Like I said, that's something that he really stuck to through the whole thing. And it could have been just one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, that's what we intended, but a lot of times, you know, filmmakers can intend something, and then it just kind of keeps trailing. There's too much that they want to do. But you could tell Cooper was very adamant about it always, no matter what, it always had to come back to Felicia, and that's exactly what the movie is. And so, and the different ways that he pulled that off, whether it be, you know, scenes with actually have Felicia in them, or these scenes where he's just using the music, or a certain perspective or whatever. That's or just, you know, the discussions of her. It's all coming together, and Mulligan's presence here is... What's really interesting about it is not only does she have, like, you know, the commanding presence to... When we talk about, like, him having consequences, because, you know, he's in this marriage, but he's doing things outside of the marriage. So he rightfully has consequences to that. But the interesting thing about watching Felicia and Mulligan's performance throughout it is she does establish that she's an actress. So when we're watching Mulligan's performance, it does often feel like an actor acting, which is what we were talking about before. But in this case, it makes perfect sense, not only because she's an actress, but she's essentially always on, because there is so much pain in her life, kind of being in this, you know, unfulfilling marriage and this kind of deceitful marriage in certain ways. But there is that point in time we can see it slowly coming down. There are moments where it breaks through, like the fight on Thanksgiving. It obviously, the facade comes down. There's the moment where she's talking to Sarah Silverman. That, you know, shot that's like becoming famous at this point, where it's just on her and only her as she monologues, and you can see the facade coming down. But then naturally, of course, this movie's going to get to that point where she gets her diagnosis, and then there is no facade anymore. Like, it all, like, she can't put up the act anymore, and it's just vulnerability. And so in these moments when we just kind of see her at her, you know, most vulnerable and most torn down, and she's literally dying, it's... When you look back on the rest of the performance and you see, oh, she was putting on a front for a lot of her life, really. Just really shows the heartbreak of this whole thing. But the way she plays, like, it could be seen as, you know, easy to do the really dramatic stuff, where she just kind of basically has to cry and try to come to the, you know, exception that she's gonna die or whatever, and how that's, you know, I mean, not to treat that lightly, but there's a lot of movies with a lot of performances where actresses have to cover this territory. So there's a lot of precedent to, you know, the performance that kind of comes with this type of scene. But when you have the context of everything that came before it, where this is somebody that's always kind of put on their acting face and their acting personality, and kind of hides themselves behind that, where the facade rarely slips, there's a whole other layer to how heartbreaking this is when we get to those points. And even down to these little details, like when she's folding the toilet paper, which apparently is a thing, in this really eerie way, where Cooper was doing an acting roundtable, and I want to say it was Coleman Domingo brought up that he had a family member that had cancer that did the exact same thing, and I guess Cooper took it from something in his real life. I had a great-grandmother when I was like 10 that had Alzheimer's, and the night before she died, she took out all of the tissues of the tissue box and folded them like that. I don't know what that is, but it was really eerie seeing that detail in here. And just something else that really brought something really authentic to it. And that's... Yeah, so all this stuff involving Mulligan, Mulligan really does feel like the star of the show. And it was actually surprising to me, because this might help also that Netflix kind of has inflated runtimes a little bit, because like they have their full credits set, and then they have like, credits in other languages and stuff like that. So Netflix runtimes are actually longer than the actual movie is. So this movie did not end where I thought it was ending. I thought it had a lot more left. So I was kind of blindsided when the title came up. But I actually love it because it ends in kind of the perfect place. Because we're talking about it being a Felicia movie, a Carey Mulligan movie. And once she dies, there's really nothing left. And so, even though you're kind of expecting it to go on because you get it in your head, it's a Bernstein movie. Like I said, because Cooper knows he's making a Felicia movie, there's like a few minutes left when we lose Felicia. Because we've got the scenes where it comes back around to where he's an old man. He has the scene where he's, teaching and conducting. There's the scene where he and the guy dance to Shout, the Tears for Fears song. And then it's over. Just like that. And it's like I said, just when you think there's going to be like, in another movie, and maybe a lesser movie, a more indulgent movie, there would be like another half hour after we lost her. But when we lose her, Cooper knew the story was done, that he wanted to tell. And I love that so much. Like the whole last 10 or 15 minutes of this movie, and the way that it ends, because she even says that line, you're going to end up a lonely old queen. And sure enough, her words. But that's the thing, is she dies, and then he becomes an old man. He's still hanging out with his students, younger men. And then there's the scene where they're dancing to Shout, and then this scene devolves into him dancing by himself. And like I said, from there the movie's over. And that's... Yeah, there's a lot... It was like... I think that in particular was when I started to come around on this movie, where it's like, where I went from, okay, yeah, it's good, but man, they really hyped it up, to, oh no, I think I really like this movie. Kind of came from revisiting that last 10 or 15 minutes, is where it like really clicked, that it's like, Cooper really knew what he was doing when he made this. I don't care what anybody says. And that really started to come through for me, and it comes through for me the more I think about it, too. I did have some criticisms from the first time I saw it that still kind of carry over. Like, talking about the scene... There's two big scenes where they fight. And like I was saying, I like the way these scenes are shot, where the camera just sits still. It just sits in one place. It feels like he kind of took inspiration from Ingmar Bergman, which is actually who I want to talk about. Because I have said before that I understand it when you're watching, especially if you're watching a movie about a deteriorating marriage, and the fact that, like I said, the thing I've been praising is the fact that Cooper wanted to make a movie about this marriage. It makes perfect sense you have scenes where couples are fighting. But and I'm not sure exactly what I'd be asking of movies that do this, but what I can tell you is that I feel like I could go the entire rest of my life without watching a movie couple fight. And so and the reason I bring up Bergman especially is it's like, because scenes from a marriage already exists, I feel like you can never do another couple fighting scene without it being a lesser version of any scene in Scenes from a Marriage. So it's like that movie way back then basically made all other couples fighting scenes obsolete. And so it's like, and you just feel like you're the person that's like, you're at a friend's house, a married friend's house, and them and their wife or their husband start fighting, and you're just kind of awkwardly stuck there watching it. That's what it feels like watching a lot of scenes like this in any movie. And it doesn't come from investment in the characters. It comes from these people are just screaming at each other, and I don't really feel much of anything about it. And so I remember not getting much out of that angle. But like I said, I still praise the movie endlessly for being a movie about a marriage, because that's what he set out to do, and it deviates from the typical slow, boring biopic nature that it could have been. I guess another thing would be Sarah Silverman kind of stuck out to me a little bit, where I think Sarah Silverman is a fantastic dramatic actress. If you've seen Take This Waltz or I Smile Back, she's a fantastic dramatic actress, but I don't know that she's capable of being like a chameleon actress, which I think is what they were kind of trying to attempt here. Because this is a case where it's like you can only kind of see Sarah Silverman, and it kind of sticks out. So all of those scenes felt a bit too almost community theater, I guess you could say. If there's any way that Sarah Silverman could be a chameleon actor, I would say it's in voice work. So she is capable of it to an extent, and like I said, she's a fantastic dramatic actress. But as far as blending into roles like this, I think she might stick out a little too much. So that was kind of distracting whenever she had scenes, which is unfortunate because I love her. But those were kind of the criticisms I came away with that still stick around. But they're not a lot. And like I said, I'm not even in love with this movie necessarily. I just really like it, and I can really see where there's a lot of artistic merit in it, like the way it looks, the way it's shot. Matthew Levitic really earned his Oscar nomination. Like those, like the shot with like the lamp on the stage when they're doing that scene. It kind of reminds me of that first shot of Edward Norton in Birdman, which I really love. There's transitions like the Carnegie Hall transition, or that scene where they're on the stage and then Felicia walks to the front of the stage and then it transitions into like her at the end of a show. It's really great. There's the scene where one of the kids throws him like, you know, a drawing from down the stairs and we're looking up there. The black and white stuff looked so good. And the color stuff also. And like I said, there's choices of putting the camera far away or not moving the camera at all, stuff like that. That's stuff that really stands out. When he can be really flashy and energetic the way he made this movie, but it didn't feel like he was trying too hard as far as like, you know, waving your arms in front of the camera and saying, "Hey guys, look how much I'm directing." And like I said, I can imagine some people might feel that way. I thought there was just enough restraint and also just enough high energy that there was a good balance, to where I feel like it works in both aspects given whatever the scene calls for. So I think that's about it. I think I was getting ready to make another point and then I cut myself off and I don't remember what that was. So that's just going to be lost to the abyss, I think. So that's I think what I have. One more thing, I can't remember if this came through when I was trying the live stream with them. But the scene where he has to lie to Maya Hawke about his affair came up, and I was talking about that kind of being a big scene, and I was admiring the fact that his big scenes in the movie are actually quite downplayed, and that's another one where you can kind of see that he's not trying to put the spotlight completely on himself, where he doesn't want to make himself the star of the show. He wants Carey Mulligan to kind of be the star of the show. And so I like moments like that, where his big moments, most of them are pretty downplayed. You can even see some nuances in there. So all of that, and the sort of lack of glamour in many cases, like as he kind of gets older and more, and kind of like, you know, lets himself go a little bit more, like the beard comes out and he's snorting cocaine openly and stuff like that. There's the little moment where he's being interviewed. The interview I was talking about outside, where he's it turns into a Felicia conversation. There's that moment where he pulls out a tissue and just like wipes his nose, and like that's just something you wouldn't see a vain actor do. So just little things like that I was really appreciating throughout the whole movie. So that's basically how I feel. And like I said, I can imagine there'll be a lot of disagreements, sure, but that's how I feel about it. So you can see where I'm a bit appalled when people will just kind of say, "Oh, it's horrible. Oh, it's terrible." It's the fact that they do it without elaborating that's really annoying, and that you see that throughout. And like I said, you'll see whole videos about it, but all they really bring up is, "Oh, it's Oscar baity," or whatever, or it's soulless or whatever. And it's like, I think we just watched a different movie. Because I think there's a lot of merit in this one, and I'm really happy with what Cooper did, and I think he's a very strong director. I thought he was a very strong director with A Star Is Born as well. But I guess I can get people being cynical towards actors and thinking it's vanity and stuff like that, because you do see a shitload of that, but I don't know, there's something really sincere about Cooper to me, even if he can make it pretty easy to be cynical, I guess. But I think he's sincere, quite honestly. So So it's just sometimes it can make you a bit susceptible to getting roasted when you're sincere. It happens, but that's basically how I feel about this. So hopefully this is a good companion piece to however they finish the live stream, and you got something out of this. Even if, like, if you already hated Maestro, I'm not going to convince you of anything. Obviously, I know that. I just had to get out how I feel about it. So that's how I feel about it. So I guess this is also a good practice round since I have to get back into the habit of doing 2024 movie reviews, which I'm hoping to start pretty much as soon as the Oscar ceremony is over, like the following Tuesday or something after the Oscar ceremony. Should be when we start talking about 2024 movies and kind of getting back into the habit of doing that weekly. So that's what we're going to try. So until all that, I think that's it.